I want to talk to you about gloves, but not just any gloves. No, I want to talk to you about good winter gloves that also work well with a touchscreen. See, I live in the Northeast and the winters get cold. Not like Minnesota cold or Michigan cold, but still pretty cold. You gotta wear gloves. And you know, if you come from a cold place, that using gloves can sometimes pose a problem when you're trying to use a touchscreen. So I had to find touchscreen friendly winter gloves. And I didn't really know where to start. I didn't test any gloves, and I didn't feel like going to a store and testing a bunch of random gloves to see if they worked with my phone. But luckily, one morning I happened to have Good Morning America on the TV. And a fella named Nick Guy from this website called Wirecutter was talking about touch screen friendly winter gloves. But he wasn't just saying, I think these are the best, or yeah, it's like really important to find them. He was talking about how he and his team at Wirecutter found and tested a dozen different pairs of touchscreen friendly winter gloves. And they evaluated those gloves based on a bunch of criteria, and they determined that the best touchscreen friendly winter gloves were the Moshi Digits winter gloves. And I thought this was great. I went out and I immediately bought those gloves because I needed touchscreen friendly winter gloves. Right at that moment, I had been thinking about that. So I bought those gloves. But more importantly, Nick provided good, relevant information to an audience that went beyond Wirecutter. I had never heard of Wirecutter at this point. And after that point, I checked them for basically anything I was thinking about buying until I got a Consumer Reports subscription. Now I check both places. So he provided good, relevant information. He also drove traffic to the website. And this is important because Wirecutter doesn't sell their own products. They make money off of affiliate links. And so people went to Wirecutter, looked for those gloves, clicked the affiliate link, and then bought them. And those gloves were sold out for weeks. So again, Nick went on Good Morning America, provided good, relevant information that drove traffic to his website that led to a product being sold out. It's also worth noting that Wirecutter got bought by New York Times the next year, and I'm not gonna say that the reason was going on GMA, but it probably didn't hurt. But I know what you're thinking. What does all of this have to do with you and your store? Because let's be honest, as a small business owner myself, we're probably not going to get the chance to go on Good Morning America. Most business owners aren't. But if there was a similar opportunity, a similar medium, a smaller audience, but the same sort of thing, well, that might be the sort of thing that we'd be able to go on. And there is. And the answer is podcasting. So in this talk, I'm going to tell you about 3 ways to increase page views to your website with podcasts. The first is to go on other people's podcasts. The second is to have your own podcast. And the third is through podcast sponsorship and partnership. All right, so let's get started. The first is to go on other people's podcasts. I think this is probably your best bet, especially in the short term. You don't have to do any of your own work to set up a podcast and build an audience. So why should you go on other people's podcasts? Well, this is the Wirecutter GMA approach. The best way to build your audience is by getting in front of other people's audiences. So you go there, you provide value, and then you can drive traffic to your website. You're being introduced to a group of people who have likely never heard of you before, and you have the opportunity to convince them you know what you're doing and what you're talking about, and that you can solve their problems. But it's really important to find relevant podcasts to do that. If you are a bicycle repair shop, it doesn't make any sense to go on true crime podcasts, even if the murder was with a bicycle. Instead, you probably want to find podcasts about cycling or training for a triathlon or teaching your kid how to ride a bike. Those are going to be in sports and health and fitness. So how do you find podcasts to go on? Well, you look on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Listen Notes. Now, Apple Podcasts is still probably considered, it's got the most name recognition for podcasting, but Spotify is just neck and neck with Apple Podcasts. So check both of them for podcasts that you could go on. And then Listen Notes is a great app that basically combs the internet for podcasts, presents the episodes to you, as well as like a rating for how well or how big their audience is relative to the rest of podcasts, right? So it could say that they're in like the top 5% of podcasts, but that's less relevant. You're not necessarily looking for the biggest possible audience because, look, we're not all selling touchscreen friendly winter gloves, which is something that half of the United States and a lot of the world needs. We're probably selling more niche products or services. And so the podcasts that we're trying to go on are more niche. And that's the second tip here. Find podcasts in your niche or category that talk to your target audience. And then here's the coup de grace, I guess, if you're going to try to get yourself onto other people's podcasts. Write a pitch email that puts the listener first. I can't stress this enough. A pitch where the person just brags about themselves is one that immediately gets deleted for my podcast. Because your job is to add value, not talk about how great you are. Most of the pitches I get are, hey, my name is Johnny Baseball. I played for Harvard when I was 5, and then I played for the Yankees when I was 10, and by 20 I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I am so great. Wouldn't I be a good guest for your podcast? And my answer is no, because I'm not looking for people to just brag about themselves on my podcast. I'm looking for people who are going to add value for my audience. So a better pitch would be, hey, I'm Johnny Baseball. I made it to the major leagues when I was 10. I retired by the time I was 20. And then I wanted to find a new avenue for my creative energy. So I started a business, but I knew nothing about tech. And I figured it out, and I found these great tech tools to help small business owners that I want to talk about. Well, great. Now I know that you can help my audience, you understand what my audience needs, and you're providing a good story. So again, your job is to add value, not talk about how great you are. Now, the alternative to this, if you are not sure where to start, or maybe you're not sure about the amount of legwork you need to do, is to hire a podcast agent or or PR agency. I know lots of people are in this business, and to be honest, most of the pitches are kind of bad. They're the first version of the Johnny Baseball pitch that I get, but some are really good. Lemon Pie, for example, is a really good podcast agent. They understand my show, and their pitches fall in line with the value that the guest can add for my audience. My favorite is Brittany Lynn from the Human Connections Agency. They specialize in getting people on podcasts and other media, but I know her best through podcasts. And she's actually proof that going on other people's podcasts can land you more work, because I heard her on a podcast that I listened to, and then I hired her, and now we have a working relationship. So This is the alternative if you do want to outsource this kind of work, because it is a lot of work finding podcasts, understanding their audience, and then reaching out. But no matter what you do, whether you do it yourself or you outsource the work, this next part is on you. How can you be a good guest? Well, first, you need to provide good value for the listeners based on your expertise or products. Again, what made the Wirecutter appearance so appealing was that it was somebody who demonstrated their expertise, who solved a specific problem I was trying to solve. Don't hard pitch, right? Again, he didn't say go to Wirecutter and please click on our affiliate links. He just provided the information and where you could find the evaluation. So talk about what you know, how you can solve the audience's problems, but don't specifically try to sell your product. People don't want to be sold to when they're listening to a podcast necessarily. Most people listen to podcasts to learn something new or solve a problem they have. But what you can do is have a clear call to action and a landing page. This is how you're going to grow your audience, not by begging for sales, but by getting people on your mailing list or over to your website. Your call to action and offer will be what drives traffic. So you do your spot, you talk about, again, if you run a bicycle shop, you talk about all of the ways to fix your bicycle chain, and then you say at the end, hey, this only scratches the surface of how bicycle chains work. If you want to learn more, head over to my website /podcast, and you can get a free resource for a video guide for how to actually fix your broken bicycle chain. And for your call to action, make it an easily speakable URL. People are going to be listening to a podcast while they're doing other things. So you don't want a super long URL that's hard to speak or hard to remember. You want it to be something like the URL for this talk, casabona.org/holiday. I usually try to make it my website / the name of the host, because people are going to know the name of the host. So they just really need to remember my website. And then have a freebie or offer that relates to the subject, and capture email addresses. No matter what, building your email list is the best thing that you can do here, because now you are actually capturing that audience. It's not just a podcast spot anymore. You're getting people from their audience to your audience, and then you can provide more value, but also market to them. So it's more than just a one-time deal by going on the podcast. Now, here's another quick tip. Make the offer better than a discount. A PDF that helps listeners is compelling. Like I said, most people, I think like 70%, listen to a podcast to learn something. So if you want to capture their email address in a compelling way, say, I talk even deeper about this, go to this website, put in your email address, and you'll get a free PDF. And you could still do the discount. In the email say, hey, here's your free resource. Thanks so much for signing up for my list. By the way, I sell bicycle chains, or I sell bicycle chain repair kits. Head on over here and get your 15% discount. But your offer needs to be compelling. You want to hook people with the podcast spot by showing them you know what you're talking about, and then you want to capture them by offering some other supplementary piece of information to get them on to your mailing list. Okay, so that's going on other people's podcasts, but what about starting your own podcast? Well, this is the longer game, because you're more or less starting from scratch, right? You can market to your current social media audience, you can market to your current customers, but if you're looking to grow your business and get more people visiting your website, this is the long game. But it allows you to continuously establish your expertise, grow your audience, and drive traffic. If you're creating good, compelling content, then people, whether it's after the first episode or the 15th episode or the 50th episode, they're going to want to know more about you. So being consistent shows that you show up, that you're willing to help people, and that forms a stronger bond with you. But it's also highly reusable content. You do a podcast episode and you can republish that to YouTube. You can do a write-up of the topic with all the talking points for your blog, and you can promote that content in your newsletter. And that's nothing to say of the clips that you can add to Instagram stories and TikTok, or the tweets, quotes from the episode that you can send out. So this is highly reusable content that could be used to reach more audiences, get shares, and then again, ultimately drive traffic to your website. So how should you run your podcast? Should you do interviews? Here's the thing. Most people think that they should do interviews only, but if you are looking to establish your own expertise and show people you know what you're talking about, an interview-only show is not your best bet. It's a solo show where you talk about the problems that you're solving. That doesn't mean you can't have interviews. It just means that, have mostly you or people from your team talking. So talk about the problems and solutions your target audience has. You want to show people you know how to solve their problems. And by the way, we also offer a product that solves this problem. Highlight your products every so often. It shouldn't be the main driver of your content, but it's okay to mention, because you have the product or service because you want to solve that problem. And then, of course, have a clear call to action to get people to your website and build your list. Again, people are only going to be half paying attention with a podcast usually, right? Maybe they're on a run, maybe they're driving, maybe they're multitasking. And maybe they're not going to listen to every episode. But if you get them on your email list, they'll get all of those emails. Whether or not they open them, they'll still see the subject line. You'll still be top of mind once a week. So have a clear call to action to get people to your website and onto your list. Now, if you're wondering, hey, what can I talk about? Going on a guest podcast is one thing. I can do the same song and dance on every podcast. But if I start my own, I got to come up with new content weekly. I don't know about that. Well, here are some ideas for you. 3 ways to solve whatever problem you solve. 3 ways to fix a broken bicycle chain. You could do customer case studies. Hey, Jim came into the shop and was having trouble with his bicycle chain, and I showed him how to fix it right there and there on the spot with our bicycle chain workshop. And now it's 6 months on and he hasn't had a single problem. Behind the scenes on how a product is created, I was fixing bicycle chains and I realized that there wasn't the right toolkit for the job, so I created a toolkit. Here are the sketches, here's the manufacturing, and now here's how it works. People love behind the scenes content because it gives them a peek behind the curtain. And then listener feedback and questions. Your call to action can include feedback. Hey, if you have any questions, reach out. There's a form right on the website. Or it could just be emails that you get from your website or on social media. It doesn't have to explicitly be from podcast listeners. It could be questions that other people are asking you about fixing bicycle chains or whatever it is that you do and whatever problem you solve. Aggregate those and answer questions in a listener feedback and questions episode. So here are some examples of brands with great podcasts that help promote their products without overselling. Deliverability Defined is a podcast by ConvertKit on how to send better emails. Things like making sure you don't land in the spam folder, or how to increase your open and click rates. And they do a really good job of giving you actual information and then saying, by the way, ConvertKit handles this for you. The Store Builders podcast by Nexus is a podcast on growing your e-commerce store. So they are helping their target audience make more money because they offer hosting for e-commerce shops. And so they want to help their customers grow their business. The Audience podcast is by Castos on running a better podcast and podcast news. So no matter what audio host you use, if you are a podcaster, Audience podcast provides good value. And then maybe they talk about private podcasting and say, hey, most audio hosts don't offer this, but we do. So if you want to start a private podcast, we can get you over to Castos. And Thoroughly Considered is a podcast by Studio Neat about how they design and create physical products. This is super interesting to me because they painstakingly go through all the details. They have a lot of experience about Kickstarter. And when you listen and you hear how passionate they are about making sure their products are as perfect as possible, well, that alone kind of makes you want to buy them. So they are doing a really good job of talking about how they're running their business, which is helpful for physical product owners, but it also helps people learn about their products and the importance of that attention to detail. So the tip here, if you start your own podcast, is build your list with a clear call to action. Too many podcasts don't have a clear call to action. They just say, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or follow us on YouTube. That's not good enough. Instead, it should be, hey, if you want to learn more about maintaining your bicycle so that it lasts longer, head on over to bikepodcast.com/123. That's the episode number. Over there, you'll find show notes. You'll also find a way to get a free PDF on how to fix your bicycle chain. If you want to submit feedback, you can do that too. Again, that's bikepodcast.com/123. That's your website. People are going to it to get an extra resource, and then they're on your website. So they opt in. You say, by the way, if you want to learn about our tool to fix bicycle chains, we sell it here. Check it out. And the third option is podcast sponsorship. So I know maybe you're thinking, well, Joe runs a podcast. It would behoove him to talk about podcast sponsorship. But again, I think going on other people's podcasts is the most important and the best way for you to get page views. However, there are reasons that you might want to try podcast sponsorship. First of all, people who listen to a show trust the host. They will trust the host more than they trust you until you can establish that trust through demonstrating your expertise. With a podcast ad, you can also be specific about your messaging and when the ad runs, and a direct sell is expected, right? So the podcast host should make sure that they are making it clear that they're reading an ad and that they're going to talk about the benefits and how you can buy it. And again, with a podcast ad, you get to control all of this. I've had people try to come on my show and say, all right, we want to promote this thing, and the episode needs to come out on October 6th or whatever. And I'm sorry, you don't get to choose that. And if it's going to be a 30-minute sales pitch, I'm either not publishing the episode or I'm going to send you a bill. So if you're going to be a guest, you need to provide value for the audience. But if you want to specifically promote something, well, that's what podcast sponsorships are for. So again, people will trust the host. You can be specific about your messaging and when the ad runs, and you can do the direct sale. Now, a couple of things to think about when doing podcast sponsorships. Make sure the host does the ad read. This is so important because, like I just said, people trust the host. So if they're going to get a voice actor to do it, then it kind of degrades that trust a little bit. Podcasts are an intimate medium. Put $1 in the jar. That's how everybody describes podcasts. But it's true, right? People listen to that host and they trust that host. And if the host does the ad read, it's that host giving their stamp of approval. And so that's really important. You should also know the difference between permanent and dynamically inserted ads. A permanent ad is usually read by the host during the podcast itself. So it's always going to be in that episode, no matter how much time passes. Dynamically inserted ads are generally when a host pauses and leaves a tiny gap where they mark the time. And then there's software that will automatically refresh and replace ad reads. So the benefit is dynamically inserted ads could be cheaper because they're literally however many listens that ad gets. But people, with permanent ads, people who advertised on my show in 2017, that ad is still there. So anybody who's listening to the back catalog will hear about that sponsor. If you're promoting a specific event or time-sensitive deal, dynamically inserted ads might be better. But if you're trying to build that brand awareness, permanent ads are much better. You should also let the host use your product or service. Again, this is important because people trust the host, and you want the host to give their stamp of approval. And if they can intelligently talk about your product and what they liked about your product, then that's going to lend even more credibility. And on that same token, it's my credibility on the line. So I want to use, or at least try, everything that's advertised on my show, because if I'm talking about it, I want to make sure it's good. So let the host use your product or service. Finally, you should sponsor at least 6 episodes. Again, people are going to skip episodes. People are only half listening. The more often you sponsor a podcast, the more likely it is that people are going to hear and remember and visit. This is why Squarespace and Casper and MeUndies, this is why all of them sponsor every podcast all the time. Because you don't always need a new mattress, you don't always need a new website, and you don't always need new underwear. But when you do, you're going to remember, oh man, I heard about MeUndies like 1,000,000 times. I'm going to go check them out. And I'm going to use that discount code. And speaking of, measuring ROI for a podcast can be really hard. Because again, people are listening, maybe they remember your name later and Google it, but here are a few things that you can do to help. Have a custom landing page for listeners. There's that pesky clear call to action again. All right, make it yourwebsite.com/name of podcast or name of host. From there, have your offer. This could be a direct sale, 20% off or whatever. Have a discount code to track purchases for people who don't access your website through the landing page you set up, but you can still track those purchases because they're going to hear the discount code and remember it and use it later. But it's also really important to understand that this could be more about building awareness now than it is buying right now. So again, people aren't going to need a mattress all the time, but that's not why Casper advertises on podcasts. Maybe some people will buy today, but when they do need a mattress, they'll remember Casper because their favorite podcast host talked about it. So what's the biggest takeaway? It's a clear call to action. No matter what you do, remember that people will be listening with one ear. They'll be multitasking, doing other things. And so they're not going to remember a complicated call to action, or they're not going to remember to do 4 things. They're going to remember, hey, visit casabona.org/holiday to get your free PDF or your discount code or whatever. Have that clear call to action, repeat it a couple of times to embed it in their memory so that when they are ready, they can either check the show notes for it or they can visit it themselves. But no matter whether you have your own podcast, you're a guest on someone else's podcast, or you're sponsoring, that custom landing page and that clear call to action will do wonders. Thanks so much for watching my talk. My name's Joe Casabona. I help creators create more easily. I also help people make money podcasting. You can get these slides and all of the resources and a special offer I'm going to tell you about in a minute over at casabona.org/holiday. Be sure to connect with me on Twitter. I'm at @jcasabona. Let me know what you thought about this talk. And if you want some ideas for your own podcast or what you could talk about going on podcasts, there's a free PDF available at casabona.org/holiday along with the slides that will give you 52 podcast episode ideas and topics. And if I've really sold you on this and you're like, how do I start a podcast? Or how do I specifically be a good podcast guest? Well, for people who are attending the Holiday E-commerce Summit, I'm offering a free 30-minute podcast consult. You can sign up again over at casabona.org. Thanks so much for watching my talk. I hope you learned something. And until next time, get out there and build something.